So today is Saturday, February 17th, 2024. Yesterday, the 16th, is the traditional date of the Buddha's Parinirvana, his complete entrance into nirvana itself, leaving behind all further fallings into time and space and a limited body, particular, unique and separate. So for him, death was a great fulfillment, completion. And we will take a look today at the Buddha's Parinirvana and also how it relates to our own life. Of course, we have Dharma brothers and sisters who were in Kushinagara yesterday on pilgrimage, and were actually there and did their ceremony, which we will have our ceremony after another round of zazen after the Teisho. But they were actually there at Kushinagara, where the Buddha entered Parinirvana and had their ceremony there. Of course, life itself, our life, is a pilgrimage. What is the point of our pilgrimage? This is the foundation of our practice, really. So to start with, we'll look at a version of the Buddha's Parinirvana, which is in the completely revised and expanded edition of the Hungry Tigress, Buddhist Myths, Tales, and Legends, and Jataka Tales, rather, Buddhist Myths, Legends, and Jataka Tales. And it's an earlier book of my own. So the story of the Parinirvana goes like this. In his 80th year, the Buddha became ill. He admitted to Ananda, his cousin and attendant, through whom all the sutras have come down to us, because he had photographic memory. He admitted to Ananda that the time of his departure was near. He said his body was like a worn-out cart that could only be kept going with difficulty. Only in deep meditation, when all sense of the body had fallen away, body-mind had fallen away, did he find himself at ease. The Buddha then addressed the monks, saying, all component things grow old. Work out your liberation with diligence. Time waits for no one. In 3 months, the Tathagata, he who is thus come, will enter nirvana. Then, accompanied by many monks and with Ananda by his side, the Buddha walked to Pava, stopping at the mango grove of the smith Kunda. The smith received instruction from the teacher, then, with his heart gladdened, fed the assembly a lavish meal. During that meal, the Buddha ate some mushrooms. Some accounts say it may have been pork. No one is really clear on what the dish was that he ate, but after eating it, he immediately told Ananda to set the dish aside and let no one else eat from it, for the food in that dish was not right, was spoiled. And after this, he himself was struck with such pain that he could hardly stand. When the pain abated, he and Ananda and the monks set off for Kushinagara. The Buddha was weak, and they walked slowly, taking their time to complete the journey, resting by the riverbanks and beneath the trees. During that journey, the Buddha counseled Ananda that no one was to blame Kunda the smith, nor was the smith himself to feel any blame. 2 meals, he said, are supremely precious to all Buddhas. One is received just before the one who has thus come attains perfect enlightenment. You remember that was the bowl of milk rice he received from the maiden of the village, where he had just renounced his terrible ascetic practices, where he was really literally skin and bones and veins, and that was about it. And she came and offered him a bowl of milk rice, and that was that meal just before his full enlightenment. And the second one that is so full of good karma is the one received just prior to Buddha's full entrance into nirvana. Therefore, he added, everyone should know that with this final meal, Kunda the smith has established a very good karma, beneficial to himself and to others, so there is no reason for him to grieve. At last they arrived at the sala grove of the Mallas at Kushinagara on the far shore of the Haranavati River. It was almost 3 months to the day from the time of the Buddha's initial pronouncement of his going forth into nirvana. The Buddha turned to Ananda and said, Ananda, please set up a couch for me between the twin sala trees with my head to the north. I must lie down. I can go no further. Weeping, Ananda did as the Buddha requested, spreading and folding a cloth over the stone couch that lay beneath the trees. The Buddha then reclined on his right side upon this couch and ever mindful, alert, and self-possessed, rested there. Though it was out of season, the twin sala trees flowered, and blossoms rained down from the branches and from the sky. Unearthly music sounded. Ananda was astonished by these miracles, but the Buddha said, it is not thus that the world-honored one is truly reverenced. Those who do good, who uphold the practices and precepts of good character, who fulfill their duties in life, both great and small, who gain an entry into the Dharma and discover that they and all beings are intrinsically Buddhas, it is such as these who, whether monks or nuns, laymen or laywomen of this faith or any other, truly reverence the Tathagata. Now, know, Ananda, this very night the Tathagata will enter nirvana. There will be no more limited return in store for me, no further error or suffering. The birds grew quiet and uttered no sound, sitting along the branches as if in trance, their bodies relaxed. Ordained practitioners, advanced disciples, and beginners, their faces covered with tears, gathered in the grove as the light of the afternoon deepened and gathered. Go, Ananda, said the Buddha, and tell the Mallas that it is time. They will be stricken with grief if they are not permitted to attend me now, just before this, my nirvana. Ananda obeyed the order, and the Mallas, their eyes streaming tears, came at once and were presented by Ananda to the reclining Buddha family by family. Then, anguish in their minds, they stood weeping among the trees of their sala grove. A lone truth-seeker named Subhada, troubled with doubts, arrived hoping to see the Buddha while time remained. But Ananda refused him an interview, saying, the Exalted One is growing weaker, friend. The hour is late. Do not trouble him now. But the Buddha, overhearing, asked that the wanderer Subhada be admitted to him. And Subhada questioned the Buddha, and with the Buddha's replies, his doubts were resolved, and he was admitted into the order, the Sangha, the ordained Sangha, and was the last disciple to be personally accepted by the Buddha. There's a Jataka tale, I think the antelope, that we've explored in the past, which talks about the past life of Subhada and how he came to be the last disciple accepted by the Buddha in his lifetime. Then the world-honored one, seeing the Mallas still caught in the nets of distress, spoke as follows. In this hour of joy, it's not proper to grieve. Your despair is quite inappropriate. Please regain your composure. The goal so hard to win, which for so many eons I have worked hard for, is now at hand. When that is won, there is no earth, water, fire, wind, or air present, but complete knowing, unchanging bliss beyond all objects of the senses, and a peace which nothing can ever take away. When you hear of that and know that no becoming mars it, and nothing there can ever pass away, How can there still be any room in your minds for grief? At Bodh Gaya, when I won enlightenment, I got rid of the causes of becoming, which are really nothing but a gang of harmful vipers. Now the hour nears when I will also be freed of this body, a crystallization of my own thoughts and deeds, arising from an endless past. Now that at last the frightful dangers of becoming are about to become extinct, now that they are to be blown out like a candle's flame, blown out by the wind, now that at last I emerge from the vast and endless suffering, is this really a time that you should grieve? So spoke the sage of the Shakyas, the Buddha, Shakyamuni. The oldest of the Mallas alone found strength to reply. We all weep, he said, but why? We should look upon the awakened one as a man who has escaped from the dangers of a house on fire. The countless gods see it like that. So should we, too. Yet the cause of our grief remains. This mighty man, the Tathagata, once he has won nirvana, will pass beyond our knowledge and sight. When those who travel in the wilderness lose their guide, they fall into distress. That is how we feel. People who walk away from a gold mine with no riches are to be pitied. Likewise, those who have seen the great teacher ought to have gained some spiritual achievement of their own. But, world-honored one, how can we say that we have? This is why we weep. The old man spoke to the point. Then the Buddha, the best of men, aiming at their welfare, addressed them one final time. Liberation cannot come from the mere sight of me. It demands sincere efforts in actual practice. But if someone has truly seen my Dharma, then that person is released from the net of suffering, even though they have never seen me at all. Similarly, the mere sight of a physician cures no illness. One must take the medicine to be well. The mere sight of me, while encouraging, enables no one to conquer suffering. Each person has to meditate and discover the liberating truth themselves. If centered and disciplined, a man or woman may live as far away from me as can be. If he or she practices realization and sees my Dharma, then that person truly sees me as well. But if a person should neglect to strive in concentrated calm for higher things, then, though they may live quite near to me, it will be as if they live far away. So work hard for truth's sake. Do good deeds and strive resolutely for enlightenment. Be vigilant. Remember, life is continually shaken by many kinds of suffering, even as the flame of a lamp is shaken by the wind. In this way, the sage, the best of all who live, encouraged and fortified the Mallas. But as they went back to Kushinagara, each one felt helpless and alone, as if crossing a swollen river on a dark and stormy night. Then the Buddha turned to his disciples and said, "Everything comes to an end, though it may last an eon. I have done all I could, both for myself and for others. I have disciplined in heaven and earth all those I could discipline. I have trained them and motivated them and set them in the stream that leads to liberation. Hereafter my Dharma shall abide for generations among living beings. Recognize the true nature of the living world and do not be anxious. Separation cannot be avoided. All that lives is subject to this universal law. Even the gods fall in time. But strive from this day onwards that it shall be no more. when the light of wisdom has dispelled the darkness of ignorance, when all existence has been seen as without abiding substance, peace ensues when life draws to an end, a peace which seems to cure a long-standing sickness at last. Everything, whether stationary or movable, is bound to perish in the end. Be mindful and vigilant. The time for my final entry into complete nirvana has arrived. These are my last words. As the Buddha entered nirvana, the earth quivered and firebrands fell from the sky. Rivers boiled, the heavens were lit with fire. Thunderbolts crashed, winds raged. The moon's light waned, and in spite of a cloudless sky, darkness spread everywhere. Beautiful flowers opened out of season on the sala trees above the Buddha's couch, and the trees bent down over him and showered his golden body with flowers. 5-headed Nagas, the great serpents, stood motionless in the sky, their eyes red with grief, their hoods closed as with deep devotion. They gazed on the body of the sage. The lesser gods wept, their hair unbound and disheveled in grief. The gods of the pure abode, the higher gods, remained composed, deep in their understanding of non-attachment to the things of this world. The kings of the Gandharvas and Nagas, as well as the Yakshas and Devas, who rejoice in the Dharma, appeared in the sky mourning and absorbed in the uttermost grief. The world, when the great sage had passed beyond, became like a mountain whose peak had been shattered by a thunderbolt, like the sky without a moon, like a pond whose lotuses the frost has withered. Only those who truly understood the deep import of the Buddha's teaching were not shaken to their depths, for like the Buddha himself, they knew well that it is in the nature of all things to pass away. We'll look at a note to this, which goes, after 45 years of teaching, the Buddha entered nirvana. The moment is revealed as a powerful and fitting culmination of an active and generous life. Many carvings and painted scrolls. We have a reproduction of one we saw in Japan on our altar now. When we do our great vows for all, or 4 vows, I'll turn the computer around and so everyone will be able to see that. 17 centuries after the Buddha's Parinirvana, the Buddhist monk poet Saigyo, viewing blossoms, wrote a really beautiful verse. And it goes like this: I saw in Yoshino's billows of blossoms that long ago time of great passing, when the sala trees surrounding him suddenly turned as white as cranes. Saigyo was a noted poet, monk. Again, I saw in Yoshino's, Yoshino is a district or area, Japan, city. I saw in Yoshino's billows of blossoms. It would have been the peach blossoms or the cherry blossoms. The cherry blossoms opened all white. I saw in Yoshino's billows of blossoms that long ago time of great passing, when the sala trees surrounding him suddenly turned as white as cranes. Though almost 2,000 years had passed, Saigyo looks at blossoms and sees the Parinirvana. The moment of the Buddha's Parinirvana is unrivaled except for the enlightenment itself in the depth of feeling it evokes in the Buddhist imagination. The two events, enlightenment and Parinirvana, complement each other. With enlightenment, the Buddha broke through to permanence, the substratum of all existence, eternal, joyous, selfless, pure, as we say in the Kanzeon. And this abiding is brought dramatically to the fore. Above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the Honored One. At the time of his Parinirvana, the passing of all things, the impermanence of all created forms is given preeminence and becomes, in effect, his final eloquent teaching. Enlightenment and Parinirvana, permanence and impermanence taken together, reveal the essence of the Buddha's life as teaching. It's a nice quote from Amagovinda in Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, speaking about the Buddha's life and teaching. He said, "Those who keep aloof from the contacts of life miss the opportunities of sacrifice, of self-negation, of relinquishing hard-earned gains, of giving up what was dear or what seemed desirable, of service to others, and of the trials of strength in the temptations and ordeals of life. Again, to help others and to help oneself go hand in hand. The one cannot be without the other. However, we should not force our good deeds upon others from a sense of moral superiority, but act spontaneously from that natural kind of selflessness which flows from the knowledge of the solidarity of all life and from the indescribable experience of oneness gained in meditation and experience, whose universal character was expressed in the general religious attitude of the Mahayana, the Great Way. It was this knowledge of solidarity which, however imperfect in its first dawning, led the Buddha in his former existences, that is the Jataka tales, upon the path of enlightenment, and which made him renounce his own immediate liberation. This is the meeting of the Buddha Dipankara, which we spoke about a few teishos ago. In a past world age, when he met the Buddha of a previous world age, he renounced his own immediate liberation in order to gain perfect Buddhahood through the experiences and sufferings and challenges of countless rebirths in the practice of the Bodhisattva virtues, which would enable him to reach the highest aim, not only for himself, but for the benefit of innumerable other beings as well. It was this knowledge which made the Buddha return from the tree of enlightenment in order to teach. Govinda says, to proclaim his gospel of light, according to which the faculty of enlightenment, or bodhicitta, is inherent in every living being. That means you. That means me. It doesn't mean the Buddha had more of it and you or I have less of it. Upon his great enlightenment, the Buddha spontaneously explained in startled wonder, because he had not expected this, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddha, fully endowed with all wisdom and virtue. Only their self-preoccupied dualistic thinking prevents them from realizing this. This was the Buddha's great enlightenment. Not that he thought about it. He saw, he knew it in his bones. It was no longer hidden. Whenever this faculty becomes a conscious force in any being, a bodhisattva is born. To awaken this consciousness was the life's task of the Buddha. It was this that caused him to take upon himself the hardships of a wandering life for 40 long years, instead of enjoying for himself the happiness of liberation. And nirvana, we should say, means literally extinguished or blown out, or to some sources say cooled down. That's its literal meaning. It implies that all causes leading to limited existence, that is, causes of greed, anger, and ignorance, have, like a candle's flame, been blown out. They're gone. Now, how does this all relate to us? It's all very well to be moved by stories of the Buddha's great enlightenment, and certainly there's a karmic benefit that comes from that sets us ourselves on a path of deepened living. but how does this really work in our life? Let's take a look. And for this, I'm going to read from A Zen Life of Buddha, the last section on death. So, we'll skip the Buddha's Parinirvana, which we just read about. Let's be honest. Death is our greatest difficulty. Accepting it, and for lack of a better word, doing it. These are our most severe challenges, fraught with the deepest anxiety and trauma. All challenges and difficulties in life stem from or circle around this primal one of finality. A personal realization of this can be devastating. I attended my mother in her dying. She was younger then than I am now, and I was younger than my own children are at present. Yet I can still hear her final stunned and terrified words as the reality of it hit her. "Oh God," she exclaimed, "I am dying." To face head-on what, as Shakespeare wrote, ends this strange, eventful history, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. That's from As You Like It. Can be terribly hard. It is beyond everything and anything we can imagine. A lifetime of practicing, of learning to be fully present with what is, seeing through habitual, unconscious identifications with the isolated, interior, small-minded sense of ourselves crouched down and terrified, is our best preparation. Roshi Rafe liked Woody Allen's joke. Woody Allen said, "I don't mind dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens." And Roshi Rafe used to say, "You know, he almost had it there." What was he missing? I think of the old saying, to gain a certain thing, you must become a certain person. But once you become that person, you may no longer need to gain that certain thing. In short, Woody Allen could joke about it, but what about living it? Death is at the core of Zen because it is at the core of life. Hakuin wrote about the terrific virtue of what he called the Great Death, his version of Dogen's dropping body and mind. Mind and body dropped. It is liberation itself he is referencing, this great death. The death of what? What is it we cling to that we're afraid of letting go? Liberation is this realization, this great death, the realization of samsara. This world is created by a wandering, inattentive mind, something quite impermanent, quite, in some ways, oddly, even though it's our whole life, peripheral. As nirvana, I see the sentence as saying, it's our recognition of this wandering. That's what samsara means, wandering. This world as created by a wandering, inattentive mind as nirvana. Samsara as nirvana. The great perfection of vast wisdom, compassion, and non-self-centeredness. This very life, this very world, which in traditional Buddhist terms is known as samsara, that is wandering, a world created by a mind that's unfocused. One wonders then, what is the world that would be if our minds were not wandering, if our minds were completely focused? And focus, of course, doesn't mean like a pencil beam focused. It means that interior, separated sense of mind having fallen completely away. The world itself steps in. This is complete wholeness. What would it be to live always in reality? This is what we might say Zen practice is all about. In any case, Hakuin was speaking about seeing through what's known as a vidya, a Sanskrit word meaning primal ignorance of our own non-dual nature, the nature that is our own nature right now. We just don't see it. And so all the sorrows of our suffering, wandering samsaric world begin with our not seeing what's actually here, is our own nature right now. And this is the cause of so much, in fact, all our sorrow. Hakuin is talking about dying to all that and all that rises from it. The Buddhist teaching is traditionally known as a poison drum. Why? Because anyone who hears a poison drum is killed dead. And from the Buddhist perspective, that's great news. It's not just an Eastern thing. In 1826 in London, William Blake signed a guest book with a beautiful drawing of a human figure stretched out, almost like an angel, flying along, holding a scroll that was kind of unfurling. Beautiful line drawing in a guest book where he was at a party. Everyone signed in. And on the scroll, he inscribed the words, William Blake, who is very much delighted in being in good company, born November 28th, 1757 in London, and has died several times since. And has died several times since. I have to wonder what the other guests at the party must have thought about that when they saw it. What is this crazy guy talking about? He's died several times since. I mean, Blake had no guide in this. He had simply the experience. That's quite remarkable when you think about it. Oh my gosh. In any case, get this. In Japan in 1749, Zen Master Hakuin wrote on the occasion of honoring a friend and a student of his who had died this little verse. Turning my head, a soaring Mount Fuji capped with snow, its lower half flushed in the crimson glow of the rising sun. Turning my head, a soaring Mount Fuji capped with snow, its lower half flushed in the crimson glow of the rising sun. Hakuin's heir, Torei, annotated this little verse, writing, these are lines whose point is grasped after you have died 2 or 3 times. Isn't that great? It's exactly like what Blake signed into the guest book in London a bit later. These are lines whose point is grasped after you have died 2 or 3 times. Yeah. In reality, of course, we are dying all the time. We call this ongoing, daily, minute-by-minute entrustment to reality our life. The Rolling Stones song Ruby Tuesday always struck me as charmingly profound with its line, dying all the time. Lose your dreams and you will lose your mind. Ain't life unkind? But is losing your mind unkind? Maybe we should be shouting hooray instead. Why? What's the joy in that? What happens if there's no veil between you and anything? No isolating thoughts, that is. No dualistic self-centered thoughts. Thoughts only arising from what's right in front of you. Being present, conscious, awake. Awake! So for the Buddha, death was the activity of his complete entrance into nirvana, of his Parinirvana. It was total entrustment, a complete giving into the actuality of realization. Practice realization itself is an entrustment, which Dogen says releases birds to the sky, flowers to the spring, snow to the winter, us to ourselves and our daily tasks, responsibilities, joys, and challenges. It is the sustained exertion or continuous practice of this very moment, allowing everything to fully be, without attempting to force it into accord with our own cherished hopes and expectations. All self-centeredness fallen away. The 10,000 things step in and are me. When we release our clinging and accommodate reality as it is, the 10,000 things can step in and be us, which, as Dogen says, is intimacy, another word for realization or enlightenment. Such dying is the essence of fullest living. Breath by breath, we entrust ourselves to the universe, to the elements that brought us forth, to our own thoughts and deeds, to our ancestors, to our loved ones, to our planet, to our children, to the mysterious affinities we call karma. It is the way of ripeness and completion, this dying moment by moment. The morning of the Buddha's great realization, the morning star stepped in and realized itself as Buddha. And yet, when death says, "Ready or not, here I come," while intellectually we have always known that this was coming, accepting that the moment has arrived can be terribly hard. There's a very lovely little death poem by a Japanese poet that Peter Matheson, great American writer who wrote, among other books, The Snow Leopard, which I hope you know. When Peter was ordained as a Zen priest and then teacher, he used this verse, this death poem from a Japanese poet of maybe several hundred years ago that went like this. This is what he wrote about receiving ordination or when he was made a teacher, either one of those ceremonies. I don't remember which. I always knew, remember this was a death poem. I always knew that one day I would take this road. But yesterday I did not know it would be today. That was the death verse. He used it as his ordination or teacher acceptance verse. I always knew that one day I would take this road, but yesterday I did not know it would be today. Remarkably, Zen masters of old seem to have found a way to enter their final moments without reservation. Some died seated, some standing on their head, some giving teisho, some eating cake or writing a poem, some with a great laugh or a great shout. One old-timer groaning in pain indicated that his groans were themselves a kind of prayer or praise. Make of that what you will. Contemporary teachers, too, have ended their days on a note of humor or calm. Practicing sincerely, we may also uncover ourselves the essence of the liberating insight that brings relief from all our mortal terrors. The impermanence unto death of our own cherished self is the source of our greatest anguish, and as such underlies all acts of foolishness and evil. We can be so terrified of impermanence that in seeking to protect our precious yet fading self, we can strike out, causing endless harm. That news is writ large these days. So many people who seem to have so much power are really terrified. They're seeking to control something that can't be controlled, life and death. And they're so terrified of acknowledging their own impermanence that they will strike out and hurt anyone else in order to avoid facing our common inheritance as human beings, which is impermanence itself. It's a very old and very sad story, one that almost every generation seems to have to live through. Perhaps it's always been so. In light of this, the Buddha aimed his teaching at one target only: ending suffering, ending the unnecessary pain we cause ourselves and others due to avidya, that fundamental, habitual ignorance of our own nature. A Buddhist parable relates that the great teacher was once sitting in a grove of trees with his sangha, and countless fallen leaves littered the ground all around. And the Buddha, to make a point, pointed to the leaves all around and asked a rhetorical question. Tell me, are there many leaves or few littering the ground? And the Sangha, of course, dutifully answered, there are many, countless leaves, world-honored one. And then the Buddha held up a handful of leaves and said, in my hand do I hold many leaves or few? And they said, very few leaves, world-honored one. And then the Buddha said, while the knowledge I have gained through enlightenment is like the many, many leaves, there are many things I know because of my enlightenment. What I teach is like this handful, this very small handful of leaves is what I teach. For I teach really only one thing: the way to end suffering. Even with the Jataka tales, the Buddha didn't sit around talking about past lives. The only reason he did tell those stories was because something was happening in the world or in his Sangha. That story of past life, particular past life, would get to the root of it and help his Sangha understand what the causes were that had led to this situation that might have seemed inexplicable. The Buddha also said, imagine someone who's been struck by an arrow. The physician arrives, but before the wounded person will permit the doctor to remove the arrow and treat the wound, they ask, tell me, was I shot with a claw-headed arrow or one with the straight point? Is the shaft spiral feathered or not? Was the shooter left or right-handed? Such a person, said the Buddha, would die before the arrow could be removed. The arrow of impermanence has already struck each one of us. How shall we respond? How will we be healed? The essential point is to remove the arrow and get well. But will we do this? The point of practice is not to think about doing it, but to do it, which means steadily, with consistency, committing ourselves daily to the count, to the breath, to the koan. February 16th marks the actual day on the Mahayana calendar of the Buddha's Parinirvana. How did the Buddha make his transition from this life? Nirvana literally means blown out, the way a candle's flame is blown out by the wind or by a breath. Whoosh! Gone. Nirvana is the blowing out of all lingering flames of greed, anger, self-centeredness, ignorance. Not ignorance of facts, ignorance of our own actual nature that sees color with the eyes, hears sounds with the ears, thinks thoughts with the brain, digests a veggie burger and turns it into muscle. Our own nature, ignorance of that. What remains when even the faintest traces of ingrained, unconscious self-centeredness are gone, entirely gone? For a realized Buddha, the passage is said to mark, that is, into nirvana, is said to mark yet another step on the unfathomable road of complete fulfillment. Prajna paramita, perfect wisdom, is gone beyond knowledge, more immediate than thought, It splits the sky like a lightning bolt. It scores the evening sky like a shooting star. There, complete, and then gone, complete. Dogen says that maturing selfless practice continues endlessly. Practice doesn't end with something called realization or enlightenment. Rather, practice realization is renewed and matures endlessly. While the practice, or the essence of practice realization, is the same for beginners as for Buddhas, the actualization of this practice evolves. Intimacy with counting the breath, with each breath, with a koan, is going beyond dualistic views of me and here and everyone and everything else out there. There is no longer room for this relative to that. That is, in comparison to that. Each thing is absolutely itself. The tall bamboo is tall. The short bamboo is short. Focusing on the practice, the relative world and the self that maintains it are momentarily gone, entirely gone. This dying is prajna paramita, perfect non-dual wisdom which carries with it the flavor of nirvana. Doubt in Zen is not skepticism, but a willingness to face questions that no one can answer for us, no teachers and no Buddha. Why was I born? Why must I die? Why is there such injustice in our world? Who is it that right now hears with these eyes, hears with these ears, sees color with these eyes? Doubt is faith in action. In Dharma Nature, section 23 of the Shobogenzo, Eye of the Treasury of the True Dharma, Dogen writes, grass, trees, and forests are impermanent. They are Buddha nature. Humans, things, body and mind are impermanent. They are Buddha nature. Land, mountains, and rivers are impermanent, as they are Buddha nature. Unsurpassable, complete enlightenment is impermanent, as it is Buddha nature. Great Parinirvana is Buddha nature, as it is impermanence. And there's this in our koan curriculum, Blue Cliff Record, Case 29. A monk asked Dasui, when the conflagration at the end of the kalpa sweeps through and the great cosmos is destroyed, I wonder, is this one destroyed or not? Dasui said, it will be destroyed. The monk said, will it be gone with everything else? Dasui said, it will be gone with everything else. Dalung, case 82 of the Hekiken Blue Cliff Record, was asked by a monk, the physical body decays. What is the eternal Dharma body? Dalung answered, the mountain flowers bloom like brocade. The rivers run blue as indigo. What is the eternal Dharma body? The mountain flowers bloom like brocade. The rivers run blue as indigo. Speaking about the Kalpa fires, and it will be gone with the rest. This can be taken as a Zen Buddhist version of tough love, but it can also be seen as a tender gift. When the compulsive, habitual addiction to me and my falls away, when it is blown out like a candle's flame, what then is there? Or we might say, what then is there? Dogen writes, what is the one thing that bodhisattvas guard? It is the aspiration for enlightenment. Bodhisattvas, great beings, always endeavor to guard this aspiration for enlightenment, just as people in the world protect their only child. It is like a one-eyed person protecting the working eye, or people traveling in a vast wilderness protecting their guide. Bodhisattvas guard the aspiration for enlightenment in this way. Because bodhisattvas guard the aspiration for enlightenment, they attain unsurpassable, complete enlightenment. Because bodhisattvas attain unsurpassable, complete enlightenment, they embody consistency, enjoyment, freedom, and purity. This is unsurpassable, great Parinirvana. This is unsurpassable, great Parinirvana. World ages ago, countless lifetimes back, the Buddha was said to have been an ordinary person like you and me, who one day simply awoke to a felt need for truth. After that, he worked at it sometimes in happy, sometimes in difficult or challenging circumstances. Buddhist tradition says it was only after lifetimes of such effort, countless failures and triumphs that 2,500 years ago, he at last awoke fully as the expert Siddhartha Gautama, thereby becoming the realized Buddha Shakyamuni. Then, from the foundation of that profound realization for the next 50 years until his death at 80, he taught others how to also realize the same liberating truth. Dying all the time, breath by breath living, it turns out, is itself the unsurpassable, great Parinirvana. The Buddha's teaching is what he does. How he lives is how he guides us. It is all of a piece, like a single length of unstained silk. The model and the challenge that the Buddha's life offers stands before us. In our own life, a Zen life of Buddha, we too can't simply talk about understanding like I'm doing here. Ultimately, we are called forth, each one of us, to demonstrate whatever understanding we might have or not have, and I don't mean simply in the formalities of the Doksan room. This is something we each face in our own living and our own dying, whether we've realized a thing, whether we're even practicing or not. Our whole life is a demonstration of our understanding or lack thereof. This is our life, this Parinirvana, and each moment of it is its final ending as well as simultaneously its new beginning. If you want to know where you might enter Zen and where you will find your own Zen life of Buddha, how about entering here? We'll stop now and recite our great vows for all before the Buddha and before the image or reproduction of the scroll of the Buddha's Parinirvana that's on the altar. So let me stop the recording.